Society tells you independence ends with age. Dead wrong. Millions of senior men surrender their autonomy prematurely, trading self-reliance for supposed security. What happens? Depression, purposelessness, infantilization. The shocking truth? Many of you are ideally suited for solitary living. These 12 signs will reveal if you're among them. Living arrangements aren't trivial matters, they're existential choices that shape your final chapters. Humans need autonomy as much as safety. Today I'll show you how to recognize when independent living isn't just possible, it's necessary. The responsibility to choose wisely is yours alone. Society trains us to view aging as a retreat, but let me tell you, nothing could be further from the truth. I've counseled thousands of men who surrendered their autonomy prematurely. They became depressed, not because they aged, but because they abandoned self-governance. Let's examine the first unmistakable sign that you're better suited for independent living. You value privacy and personal space above constant companionship. This isn't trivial. Throughout human history, men have required periods of solitude to integrate their experiences. Carl Jung called this individuation, the process of becoming psychologically whole. I remember a 70-year-old professor who lived with his well-meaning daughter. He developed what appeared to be early dementia until he moved into his own apartment. Miraculously, his symptoms vanished. Why? Because his nervous system was overwhelmed by constant social stimulation. Privacy isn't selfishness, it's psychological necessity. Your home should be a sanctuary where you can hear yourself think. Notice how your body responds when someone interrupts your thoughts or disrupts your space. That tension isn't imaginary. It's your being telling you something profound about your authentic needs. Now, let's talk about energy management. You find social interaction more draining than energizing. Some men, even in their later years, genuinely thrive in communal settings. But others, perhaps you, experience what I call social depletion syndrome. You engage, you perform admirably, but afterward you feel exhausted rather than fulfilled. This isn't weakness or antisocial behavior, it's your psychological blueprint asserting itself. Personality research consistently shows that roughly 30 to 50% of the population exhibits introverted traits. These don't diminish with age, they often intensify as our authentic selves emerge from behind the masks we've worn professionally. I worked with a retired executive who lived in a senior community. He participated in every scheduled activity, believing that's what healthy aging required. 6 months later, he was on 3 medications for anxiety. When he moved to his own cottage, continuing social activities but on his own terms, he discarded all medications within weeks. Control over social engagement isn't isolation, it's wisdom. The third indicator is financial self-sufficiency with stable resources. Money represents more than security, it embodies freedom. Your capacity to meet your own needs without dependence is foundational to psychological well-being at any age. I'm not suggesting wealth, I'm talking about sufficiency. Having enough predictable income to cover housing, food, healthcare, and modest pleasures without requiring regular financial assistance. Financial competence manifests as peace of mind. Watch yourself when you review your accounts or pay bills. Do you experience constriction in your chest, or do you feel a quiet confidence? Your body reveals truth that your mind might deny. Many men resist living alone not because they require assistance, but because they fear future financial vulnerability. This becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, surrendering autonomy because you might someday need to surrender autonomy. Living independently doesn't mean rejecting support systems. It means embracing the deep human need to stand on your own foundations. Each morning you wake in a space that's entirely yours represents an assertion of your continued relevance and competence. This isn't pride, it's alignment with your authentic nature. So look carefully at these first 3 signs. They aren't superficial preferences, they're expressions of your fundamental character. Society pressures older men to prioritize safety over self-determination. I'm suggesting something radical. Perhaps your well-being depends precisely on maintaining independence. Now let's examine the next set of signs that suggest you should live alone as an older adult. These aren't just preferences, they're fundamental indicators of your capacity for continued independence. You maintain strong physical and cognitive health. This isn't about perfection. Many men I've counseled believe they need assistance because they've developed arthritis or take medication for blood pressure. Nonsense. The question isn't whether you're aging, we all are, but whether you can manage your health conditions effectively. Your body is designed to function independently well into advanced age if properly maintained. I visited a 92-year-old former military officer who lived alone in Montana. Despite 2 heart attacks, he maintained his own routine of medication, exercise, and cognitive challenges. When I asked why he resisted moving in with his daughter, he said something profound. "The day I stop managing my own health is the day I truly become old." There's wisdom there. Taking responsibility for your health isn't stubbornness, it's preservation of dignity. The ability to track medications, attend appointments, and adapt your lifestyle to your changing body isn't just practical, it's existential. It represents your continued capacity for self-governance. When you surrender health management to others unnecessarily, you're ceding control over the very vessel that carries your consciousness through the world. The 5th sign: you can independently manage household tasks and maintenance. Again, this isn't about perfection. It's about adaptation and resourcefulness. Many men I've worked with resist living alone because they struggle with certain household tasks. But the question isn't whether you can do everything, it's whether you can ensure everything gets done, either by doing it yourself or orchestrating assistance. Consider Jacob, an 83-year-old widower who could no longer climb ladders to clean gutters or shovel snow. Rather than move in with his son, he created what he called his independence network. Reliable service providers he contracted for specific tasks while maintaining complete control over his environment. His home remained his castle, not because he could physically maintain every aspect, but because he remained the decision maker and steward. Your home is more than shelter. It's the physical manifestation of your autonomy. The ability to maintain your living space represents continued competence. Notice how you feel when you solve a household problem or complete a task that maintains your environment. That satisfaction isn't superficial. It's your psyche acknowledging continued capability. The 6th indicator is particularly telling. You have a well-established support system that doesn't require proximity. The myth that independence means isolation has driven countless capable men into unnecessary dependency. True independence in later life isn't the absence of connection, it's the strategic cultivation of the right connections. I remember consulting with a 78-year-old former business owner who had an extensive network: friends, family, service providers, and community contacts, all accessible by phone or within reasonable distance, but none living with him. When he fell and needed temporary assistance, his network activated seamlessly. He received precisely the help needed, then returned to independence without the psychological damage of permanent dependency. Modern technology has transformed the possibilities for independent living. Emergency response systems, video calling, meal delivery services, transportation options, these aren't crutches, they're tools. Just as a carpenter uses a hammer to extend his capabilities, you can use these resources to extend your independence. Each of these signs points to a fundamental truth. Independence isn't the absence of challenges or the denial of aging. It's the continued exercise of your capacity for self-determination. When you unnecessarily surrender this capacity, something vital within you begins to wither. The maintenance of your own living space, the management of your own health, the orchestration of your own support network, these aren't just practical matters, they're expressions of your continued standing as a fully realized human being. Now we delve into the deeper psychological terrain that separates those who thrive in solitude from those who merely survive it. These next signs reflect not just preferences but fundamental orientations toward life itself. You've developed effective coping mechanisms for emergency situations. Independence isn't about denying vulnerability, it's about preparing for it intelligently. I've observed that men who successfully live alone don't ignore potential emergencies. They systematically address them before they occur. This isn't anxiety, it's competence. Consider Thomas, a 76-year-old living alone in rural Vermont. His preparation wasn't motivated by fear, but by respect for reality. He established a daily check-in system with neighbors, wore a medical alert device, and maintained emergency supplies. When a winter storm knocked out power for 3 days, neighbors found him comfortably reading by lamplight, well-stocked and prepared. His foresight wasn't paranoia, it was the foundation of his freedom. The ability to anticipate and address potential problems represents the highest form of self-care. It's the practical manifestation of self-respect. When you systematically reduce unnecessary risks while accepting necessary ones, you're affirming your own value. Consider how differently you feel when facing potential challenges with preparation versus blind optimism. That difference isn't just emotional, it's existential. The 8th sign: you find your own company fulfilling rather than lonely. This distinction is crucial. Loneliness isn't the absence of people, it's the absence of meaningful connection. often with yourself. Many men I've counseled confuse the two, believing their discomfort when alone means they require constant companionship. I recall a retired surgeon who insisted he couldn't live alone because he felt empty in his own company. Further exploration revealed he'd spent 50 years defining himself through professional achievement and the admiration of others. His discomfort wasn't loneliness, it was the unprocessed encounter with his authentic self beyond professional identity. 6 months later, having learned to engage with himself as thoughtfully as he once engaged with colleagues, he reported that his solitude had become the most honest relationship of my life. Your relationship with yourself ultimately determines the quality of your independence. Notice how you feel during extended periods alone. Is there restlessness, anxiety, or is there a deepening calm, even revelation? These responses aren't random, they're information about your fundamental orientation toward yourself. The ninth sign speaks to structure. You have clear routines and self-discipline. Independence in later life isn't just freedom from external control, it's the voluntary imposition of internal order. The men I've seen thrive alone aren't chaotic, they're deliberate. Their days have rhythm and purpose, not because someone else demands it, but because they've recognized that meaningful freedom requires framework. I worked with Harold, 79, who established what he called his sovereign routine after retirement. Rising at the same time, reading with morning coffee, walking 3 miles daily, calling a friend or family member each afternoon, cooking dinner and reflecting before bed. This wasn't rigidity, it was architecture for contentment. When I asked why these patterns mattered, he said, "Without my routine, days blur together. With it, each day becomes distinct and precious." Self-imposed order isn't constraint, it's liberation. It transforms time from an adversary into an ally. Many men resist structure, after decades of externally imposed schedules, mistaking all routine for oppression. But notice the difference between doing something because you must, and doing it because you've chosen it as an expression of your values. That difference transforms obligation into affirmation. These 3 signs point toward a profound truth. Successful solitary living isn't just about capability, it's about integrity. The alignment between your inner resources and outer circumstances. The men who thrive alone aren't exceptional. They've simply developed the specific capacities that independence requires. And these capacities aren't inborn, they're cultivated through conscious choice and consistent practice. Moving forward, we turn our attention to the essential qualities that further distinguish those truly suited for independent living. These aren't merely preferences but profound indicators of your capacity to thrive in solitude. You have hobbies and interests that can be pursued independently. This isn't trivial, it's foundational. The men I've observed flourishing alone don't merely occupy time, they immerse themselves in pursuits that generate what psychologists call flow states. Periods of complete absorption where time seems to vanish and meaning emerges organically. I remember counseling Edward, a 73-year-old former accountant who initially struggled after his wife's passing. When I asked about his interests, he looked bewildered. For decades, his identity had been defined by his roles as provider and partner. We discovered his dormant fascination with woodworking. 6 months later, his garage workshop had become what he called his salvation space, where hours passed like minutes and creation replaced consumption. Independent pursuits aren't mere distractions. They're vehicles for continued growth and expression. They transform solitude from an empty space to be endured into a fertile ground for discovery. Pay attention to activities that absorb you completely. These aren't escapes from life. They're entries into its deeper dimensions. Many men mistake dependency for connection because they've never developed the capacity to generate meaning autonomously. The 11th sign is particularly revealing. You adapt well to change and unexpected challenges. This isn't about denying difficulty, it's about your response to it. The capacity to adjust course when circumstances shift isn't just practical, it's existential. It represents the continued vitality of your problem-solving faculties and your fundamental orientation toward life. Consider Robert, an 82-year-old who lived alone despite significant vision loss. Rather than surrendering his independence, he systematically reorganized his environment and routines. He developed what he called his adaptation protocols, specific responses to challenges that preserved his autonomy. When I asked what drove this remarkable adaptability, he said simply, "I decided long ago that problems aren't obstacles to my independence. They're invitations to creativity." Adaptability isn't stubbornness or denial. It's resilience in its purest form. It's the refusal to be defined by limitations rather than possibilities. Notice your instinctive response when facing unexpected challenges. Do you immediately seek assistance, or do you first explore personal solutions? That initial orientation reveals volumes about your suitability for independent living. The 12th sign speaks to your fundamental nature. You've historically thrived in settings where you have autonomy. Your past provides profound clues about your future. The men most suited for continued independence aren't developing new personalities in later life. They're expressing consistent threads that have always been present. I worked with James, a 77-year-old former teacher, who resisted his children's attempts to move him into their home after a minor fall. When we explored his life history, a pattern emerged. From choosing teaching positions that offered curriculum freedom to consistently selecting independent projects over team endeavors, his entire life showed a preference for self-direction. His children saw this as stubbornness. I recognized it as identity. Your historical preference for autonomy isn't accidental or superficial. It's an expression of your authentic self. Many men surrender independence not because circumstances demand it, but because they yield to others' expectations about aging. This represents not just a practical concession, but a profound betrayal of self. The environments in which you've previously thrived aren't coincidental. They're informative. These 3 signs collectively point toward a deeper truth. Successful independent living isn't just about practical capability, it's about alignment with your intrinsic nature. The men who flourish alone aren't denying reality. They're honoring their particular orientation toward existence. They recognize that for them, genuine well-being depends not on constant companionship, but on the continued exercise of self-governance. Having identified the 12 signs that suggest you should live alone as an older adult, let's now address the practical realities of making this choice work. This isn't just theory, it's about implementation. It's about transforming insight into action. The most common objection I hear from families is safety. They believe independent living inevitably means increased risk. This fundamentally misunderstands the relationship between safety and well-being. True safety isn't the elimination of all risk. It's the thoughtful management of necessary risks while eliminating unnecessary ones. When men are forced into living situations that violate their fundamental nature, they experience a form of psychological harm that rarely enters the calculation. I consulted with a family of a retired judge who was determined to remain in his home despite their concerns. Rather than fighting his decision, we developed what I call a sovereignty preservation plan. This included technology upgrades, smart home systems, medical monitoring, simplified communication tools, combined with regular wellness visits and community integration. The outcome? Not just continued independence, but improved health markers and cognitive function. The creation of a personalized assessment framework is essential. This isn't one size fits all. It's about honest evaluation of your specific circumstances. Begin with the 12 signs we've discussed and rate yourself honestly. Where are your strengths? Where might you need supplemental support? This isn't about proving your fitness for independence. It's about creating the conditions where independence can succeed. The transition to independent living, or the preservation of it, requires systematic preparation. Start with environmental assessment. Is your physical space optimized for your current and anticipated needs? Simple modifications, improved lighting, removal of trip hazards, bathroom safety equipment can dramatically reduce risk without sacrificing autonomy. Next, develop your support infrastructure. Identify the specific services you'll require and establish relationships before they're needed. This isn't dependency, it's strategic resource management. The technological revolution has transformed possibilities for independent seniors. Beyond medical alert systems, consider meal delivery services, transportation options, video communication platforms, and home automation. These aren't crutches, they're tools that extend your capabilities, just as eyeglasses extend vision. The wise man doesn't reject assistance, he incorporates it strategically to preserve what matters most, his fundamental autonomy. Many men I've counseled resist these preparations, seeing them as admissions of weakness. This represents a profound misunderstanding. Preparation isn't weakness, it's wisdom. It's the recognition that independence requires infrastructure. The strongest position isn't pretending vulnerability doesn't exist. It's addressing it proactively so it doesn't undermine your freedom. The deeper truth here transcends practical considerations. The choice to live independently isn't merely about capability, it's about identity. It's about honoring who you fundamentally are. For men who align with the 12 signs we've discussed, surrendering independence unnecessarily represents a profound psychological harm. It's not just a change in living arrangements, it's a violation of authentic selfhood. Society frames the conversation about senior living entirely around risk management. This dangerously narrow perspective ignores the existential dimensions of the choice. The question isn't simply, can you manage alone? But rather, what living arrangement allows you to remain fully yourself? For many men, the continued exercise of autonomy isn't a luxury, it's a necessity for continued vitality. The responsibility for this choice ultimately rests with you, not your children, not your doctors, not the well-meaning voices advocating caution above all else. The capacity to determine your own circumstances represents the final and perhaps most meaningful exercise of the freedom that has defined your life. Choose wisely, not fearfully. Choose in alignment with your authentic nature, not others' expectations. Your final chapters should be written in your own hand. Living alone as an older man isn't retreat. It's a profound assertion of your continued relevance. The 12 signs we've explored aren't mere preferences. They're expressions of your fundamental nature. Society's narrative about aging pushes dependency as virtue, but for many of you, authentic dignity demands continued self-governance. The choice between independence and assistance isn't primarily about physical capacity, it's about psychological alignment. When you surrender autonomy unnecessarily, something essential within you begins to die long before your body follows. The chaos that emerges from living contrary to your nature manifests as depression, cognitive decline, and spiritual resignation. But the order that flows from honoring your authentic needs creates not just survival but flourishing. Ask yourself, is your living situation serving your genuine well-being, or someone else's concept of what your later years should be? The answer to that question may be the most consequential one remaining in your journey.